This is the Battle of Tazewell Mayo. I began walking in graveyards during the quarantine. You can't get any more socially distant than you are walking among the dead. I have my own internal map of the cemetery where I walk. It's two cemeteries, but I think of it as one long one. That's how the deer think of it too. They come up from the river to graze along the forest edge at dawn, lingering through sunrise in the tall grass among the rusted hulks of riding mowers and club carts, abandoned to creeper vines and maintenance yards where piles of wet mulch and wood chips squat pincushioned by pokeweed, sassafras in late summer. I start at the big stone cross at the overlook opposite the ingress to Hollywood Rapids, top of Belle Isle. From there I walk north, away from the bluff and down into a sunny bowl of concentric rings of gravestones, where buttercups and dandelions grow as far as the eye can see. I like to read the names. I read some of them aloud. Sometimes I say good morning to the ones I recognize. There are some excellent character names in a graveyard, beautiful names, long vanished from the census rolls. Happily, I prefer the company of the dead to that of the living. The dead have better stories to tell, and questions that aren't answered easily in the space of a morning's walk. Reduced to the words chiseled into the stones, a cemetery is a moving narrative image of a community over time, a composite spiritual echo that is as old as the oldest stone and as new as the most recent one. Listening into that collective autobiography with an open heart is a lot like gazing into a dark sky full of stars. Much of the light you're receiving has come from forms that no longer exist, but it's light just the same, sacred light that can illuminate and cleanse even the darkest corners of the self, should one dare to permit it. On the surface level of that collective story, you can trace the rough boundaries of the sub-communities fastened together like puzzle pieces, one family at a time, within the larger community of a city, in my case, Richmond, Virginia. And most of them are bound by common geographical or ethnic origins. There are distinct, well-defined neighborhoods delineated by ethno-national identities: Italians and Irish and Armenian, Vietnamese and Cambodian Americans. The breadth of some of them may come as a surprise for the simple reason that those communities immigrated in great numbers during times when no one considered hyphenating their national identity. Were you to jerk one or two of them up gurgling from their crypts this very afternoon, they would doubtless claim American as their nationality, even if they did so in flawless Burmese or Armenian. An even loftier perspective reveals reflections of a community as existed in the world at large over time. You can see how and where force majeure took liberties with the collective consciousness of the city at various moments during the past century. And if you're a reader of history, you can suppose a lot of the backstory evoked by the information on the gravestones, too. You can walk all the way from the Irish potato famine to the Armenian genocide to the Battle of San Juan Hill in less time than it takes the maintenance guys to change the garbage bins. But you'll have to walk fast if you want to stay ahead of the ghosts. There is a place on a ridge beside the top of a hill where a little cairn of fieldstone forms the centerpiece of a roundabout where the trees all look like gallows trees in the fall. It's a spooky area from any angle, even at mid-morning in the middle of summer, even if you don't know the cairn is a memorial to the Americans who died in World War I. Just west of it lies the top of a ridge I call Spam Hill, where lie the bones of boys from Richmond who died in the Spanish-American War. Some of the stones are simply marked Spam. Others bear specific place names that were synonymous with hell in the time when most Americans first learned to say them. It's impossible to feel anything but the deepest sense of reverence in that place. Even the birds seem unwilling to sing there. One grave sits all by itself in a spot reserved by the American Legion under a flagpole close to the forest edge, a small stone marker weathered smooth over time. When the light is just so, you can barely make out it was erected in the memory of the first boy from Richmond to die in the muddy mutual slaughter that soldiers and historians alike recognize by its monosyllabic place name, Psalm. Beside it, another stone commemorates all the boys from Richmond who became men and died in the trenches of the war to end all wars. They are both small stones, poorly maintained. One seems to have been pried loose at some point, only to be cemented in place and then pried loose again. There are a lot of dead soldiers in the cemeteries where I walk. If you want to see exactly how many soldiers are buried in any given American cemetery, you have to come on Memorial Day, or on the day after Memorial Day, once the American Legion has finished placing the little flags on the graves of the veterans and the war dead. If and when you start counting those flags, remember that each one represents a soldier who probably made it home to die decades later of something natural and mundane. Because in most cases, the soldiers you meet in a cemetery are soldiers who survived the war. But each of those soldiers in turn represents thousands who never made it home, whose graves remain unmarked, and whom the survivors knew by name and loved even better than brothers. It was with some similar thoughts on my mind one crisp morning in mid-September of last year that I chanced upon a grave on the fringes of Spam Hill that had accidentally been covered over with leaves and other debris by a maintenance crew or on purpose by some delinquents making mischief. The little American flag posted there by the American Legion had been pulled from the ground and laid on its side. I was moved to sweep away the debris and to right the flag, which I tend to do anyway, whenever I see one knocked down. And so I did. As I did so, I paused long enough to read the information on the stone, and I learned that it belonged to one Tazewell Mayo, who had served in the artillery corps as a cook in the war to end all wars. That particular morning happened to be the morning of September 11th. I remembered that detail not for the reason that I usually remember it, but because it coincided with the birth date carved into the stone that lay before me. "Well, happy birthday, Tazewell," I said. It was a strange and meaningful moment, for obvious reasons. For one thing, I had a better, new reason to commemorate September 11th. In the months to follow, I reset Tazewell's flag many times, and by that following spring, the grave site of Tazewell Mayo had become a location of a set-piece spiritual battle between me and some as yet unidentified supernatural capriciousness or malevolence. Whoever or whatever it was didn't harm the flag in any way. It simply lifted the pole neatly from the ground and laid it in its place on its side in the grass, almost as if the gesture were directed not at Tazewell but at me, with full knowledge of my almost daily presence there. By the time the magnolias blossomed, it didn't matter who was removing the flag. All that mattered by then was that I remained intrepid in my daily task of refusing to surrender a small gesture that had been meant to dignify the memory of a man I had never met before. For the simple reason that we were kindred, if so only by place and by dialect. Which is to say that had I or Tazewell died alone in some foreign field, we would have done so with similar memories of home in our heart of hearts. We are kin in that most basic sense of that word, though we lived in different ends of a century, far enough apart to suggest that any similarities might indeed stop right there at geography and linguistics. It's a question worth asking, which leads me finally to some uncomfortable but necessary questions and considerations about men and war. Once upon a time, there was a much deeper well of courage and spiritual strength available to American men specifically and to American citizens in general. I believe that we were reluctant to search ourselves for an honest explanation of whatever became of that trusty old well, or to ask ourselves some related questions, like whether today's American could survive any of yesterday's wars without the benefit of having been raised on its water. Deep down, we already know the answer. We don't like it much for the simple reason that there seem to be so many wars being planned during what feels like an unprecedented dearth of common courage among common people. We have a professional military brimming full of capable, brave men and women. What about the rest of us? How many of us have the mettle to board an ocean liner bound for World War I France, or to ride a landing craft into the dragon's teeth of Normandy or the coral gardens of Tarawa? Could we even make the home front sacrifices made by our grandparents and great-grandparents during the first two wars? Could we drink chicory instead of coffee? Could we do without sugar? How about chocolate? What if Uncle Sam needed you to give up your smartphone for the war effort this time? Yeah, that's what I thought. And yet, here we are again, our chests inflated with sanctimonious rage, furiously reciting the latest litany of talking points. Parentheses, with associated place names we can barely even pronounce, much less locate on a globe, close parentheses. As we all hold hands and step willingly through the looking glass into the media funhouse of algorithm-driven rage generation, which is where we will be likely to remain, at least until we can disabuse ourselves of the essential fallacy driving this particular hysterical global conniption fit. The persistent tragic belief that anything has changed about the reality of war since last time. Nothing has changed except for the names and the efficiency of the gear. Nothing fundamental about war ever does. never gets cleaner, more exact, never gets moral or antiseptic, never gets glorious, not by any sane definition of glory. And the more we learn, the more we discover that it probably has never even been necessary. Not really. Ask Tazewell Mayo, he'll tell you. War will always, always be the same. War will always, always be the psalm. And every Memorial Day, van loads of little old veterans will shuffle out across the bluffs through the rising mists at dawn to post little flags by the stones of the boys, and now girls too, who died becoming men and women in the act of making war, until we ask them to stop, that is, or until we simply and suddenly stop sending any more kids. I'm thankful and feel indebted to them, to Tazewell Mayo, and to all of the other veterans of war dead. Not because I believe this or that about war, or because I pose one way or the other on past or current American foreign policy issues, but because they themselves believed in the causes for which they fought, and because so many of them died so young, demonstrating precisely what it means to be supernaturally courageous, all for reasons that they believed in their hearts to have been eminently moral ones. Only by their example could we ever possibly identify that particular rare combination of character traits today, much less attempt to foster the installment of some flavor of it in our children tomorrow, such that they might apply the same courage of strength, of character, to future matters of great benefit to the world at large. God only knows. We're going to need all the metal we can get. Perhaps we can use the legacy of America's veterans and war dead to name some new, even more heroic tradition, one predicated on service to humanity rather than on its murder. There are a lot of ideas worth dying for. Killing isn't one of them. Ask Tazewell. He'll tell you.